Well, Sheriff Villanueva, I want to thank you for joining us for our special Uncouth podcast today, where we're going to have a one-on-one sit down with you. Me and you have had some conversations, and we had some tough conversations. But there's some things I'll, ask you if you were willing to talk about publicly, and thankfully you said yes, you were willing to talk about those things. So that's what we're here for. Some people may not know who you are. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Alex Villanueva, Sheriff of LA County. Been in office now 3.5 years, almost 4, and I'm running for re-election for my second term. And prior to me being elected, I served the department for 32 years. Went through the ranks up to the rank of lieutenant, and that was in 2018, and then now here I'm the sheriff.
Okay, and you were military, right?
Yes.
What military did you serve in?
I served the active duty Air Force, and then the Air National Guard, and then I finished with the Army National Guard.
Oh, nice. Well, thank you for your service. All right, let's hop right into it, right? Because like I said, we're here to have an uncouth conversation where we get right into the real. There's a perception out in the Black community that, you don't like Black folks. And I just want to ask you, from your perspective, where do you think that perception came from?
Well, I think it's pretty much coming from one source. The LA Times. They're working very hard. In fact, they're working overtime to try to create conflict between the Black and Latino community, and they've seized upon that, but without any basis in reality.
So what do you think is their end game? Like, why would that be, the order of the day to create that tension between the Black and the brown communities?
Well, I think they want to keep us divided. You realize between the Black, brown, and Asian communities, the overwhelming majority of voters in LA County. But if they keep them split up in separate camps, well, who's the one that stays in charge of the political establishment? So
let me ask you, what are your plans to address this perception? Because sometimes, if it gets out there enough, perception seems to become reality. So what are some of your plans to address the perception that you don't like Black folks or get along with Black folks?
It came from one opinion writer from the Times, a guy named Gustavo Arellano. We had a sit-down meeting. We spoke about Black and Black crime, Latino crime, and overrepresentation of African Americans in the criminal justice system as victims and suspects, same thing with Latinos. And that really was a conversation. And my goal all along has been, how can we reduce that? How can we make everyone safer? He took that as an opportunity to try to take it out of context and say, oh my God, he doesn't like Black people. Absolutely false.
So now you here with me, you have a chance to give some context to that. Can you give me the full context of what the conversation was supposed to be as opposed to the sound bites that we got? Because we know that happens a lot.
Well, he kind of went on a route that he was talking about Latinos and about the perceptions of Blacks and Latinos in conflict with law enforcement, or I think it was protests when there's a death involving law enforcement. Why does it generate so much protest activity in the Black community, but in Latino community it's more muted? And I told them, well, you look at the history in the past and horrific things that Black people experienced, going from slavery all the way forward to the present, and it's diminishing over time. It's getting better generation after generation. It's obviously a lot less things to worry about, but there's other things to worry about. Latino community comes from a different perspective, depending what nation their family came from. For example, if you came from Cuba, you hated Fidel Castro, you're going to be very conservative. If you came from Mexico, you have a distrust of government in general because of corruption, and you're fleeing violence. So it's different perspectives. It's not quite the same relationship. And by and large, in the Latino community, their relationship with here, they perceive American government to be better than where they came from. So they don't have the same perspective as in the Black community from here, because you've seen been on the receiving end of a lot of miscarriage of justice going all the way back to the present time. But thankfully, the adversity is diminishing, and now there's issues. How can we get kids today to stay safe, to stay engaged in school, and to basically not be a threat?
Okay, so that was the full context, and I thank you for clearing that up. And so I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on, because we've had, like you said, there's been a groundswell of protests, and there's been a whole lot of things going on in regards to the killing of unarmed Black men. So could you give me your perspective on that, and how do you feel about that? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, anytime anyone winds up dead as a result of being an attempt by law enforcement to do an action, it's a tragedy. Doesn't matter if it was the most egregious thing done, it still ended up in a tragedy. Even a bank robber coming out of the bank with the money bags, bullets flying, that person dies, that's still a tragedy. That person has a family. They're a loved one to somebody. So when they have a death at the hands of law enforcement, they're going to fall into various groups. Obviously, one of them is going to be like George Floyd, Eric Garner, outrageous misconduct, criminal on behalf of the people engaged in law enforcement. They're held accountable. Like in the George Floyd case, all 4 were terminated. They were prosecuted. They're held to answer, convicted now. The main guy, Derek Chauvin, I'm not sure what the status of the other 3 are, but that's a positive development. In the past, that wasn't happening because they were all kind of swept under the rug.
Right.
So that is a plus. At the same time, you can have other cases that don't fit quite that bill. That they may be actively involved in a violent felony. At some point, they were armed, unarmed, or trying to disarm the law enforcement. There's a struggle. Now it's not so clear if it was right or wrong. And that we have to focus. Are we training our personnel properly? Are we screening our people who come into the workforce against biases, for example? That's a very important thing. And now we have more tools because now we can look at people's social media history when they apply, and we can actually cite people,
Well, yeah, because I kind of want to get into that because I know at a time, and I think it was when you first were running for sheriff, or either that or when you first got in as sheriff, I remember there was reports that there were a lot of really right wing, a lot of right wing cops who had some of those biases and who didn't grow up in the neighborhood. So what are you what can you do to combat those things in the culture of the sheriff's department?
Well, one thing we did immediately when I took office, we ended all out-of-state recruitment and hiring. I'm pretty sure there's wonderful Americans from all walks of life in all the other states, but they can stay in all those other states and be cops in those states because they are a member of their community. But I'm sorry, if you come from Oklahoma, Nebraska, somewhere, what relevance do you have when you become a deputy here in LA County? You don't know the people, the history, the culture. I don't believe in that. I believe in hiring our own kids to police our own communities. So we embarked on a program, a recruitment program. In fact, we had a name for it. Hometown Heroes Needed, Are You In? And it was very successful. We hired 1,100 deputies my first year in office. And now, in fact, we've opened up hiring again because they've lifted partially the hiring freeze. Now we got a flood of applicants again, and they're all coming from LA County. Because I want our kids who are born and raised in Compton to aspire to be deputies serving Compton. And we have the pay, the benefits, so they can make a profession out of it. They're not making $20 an hour, handing out water bottles to the homeless. They actually, there's a career behind it, and they can grow in the department, serving the community. And we have outstanding examples of that now. Our captain selection process, same thing. Like LaTanya Clark, born and raised in Compton, grew up to become the captain of the station.
Right. And that's how it should be.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, just to get into it a little bit, because like someone, me and Quincy talk about this a lot, like someone from Compton, you kind of, not only do you know the neighborhood, you know some of the players, you know where to look for certain things, or even just culturally. I was telling somebody, I said, sometimes if you haven't been around Black folks a lot and you just don't know that some Black folks talk with their hands, you could perceive that as a threat. And it's really like, no, he just likes to talk with his hands. So I think those small cultural things are very important in the Black community, also in the Latino community. Quincy always tells a story of how he had an older Latino gentleman. He asked him, to get on his knees. He said the guy starts crying. And then they said, oh, well, that's because when, you might get shot by the federales, they tell you to get on your knees. So he said, see, I didn't know that. And that's like a cultural thing. So I think it is very important to think of those things in regards to how you run a department, and think of those things in terms of, I don't know, just bridging that gap, right? Like having more conversations and having more things like this where we sit down and get to know, because, I'm gonna tell you, when this interview come out, people gonna flip, because I was the not talk to cop guy. Like everybody who knows me was just like, I'm never sitting down with a cop just because of the things that I went through personally. But we learn, we evolve, we get to talk to people, and our perspectives get to change. And that's another reason I want to talk to you about this. And one of the things, just because to go back to that LA Times article, one of the things that has been coupled with that in the Black community was your doctoral thesis. And there was a perception that, like, oh, you felt like Black deputies were getting hired over Latino deputies, so there was like some beef there. Is that true? And if there is, could you just speak to where that perception came from and what it is?
Actually, not at all. They should read the whole dissertation before they start, getting an idea out of it. And the title of the dissertation was Leadership, Diversity, and Law Enforcement. And I created a measurement tool for diversity called Group Mobility Rate. It allowed me to measure how groups of employees based on race or gender rose through the ranks, and I could compare organizations to different organizations. And from my study, the Texas Department of Public Safety were the most equal opportunity, diverse, and representative bureaucracy representing the state of Texas. Because if you look at their ranks, the promotional process, everybody had opportunity to move up through the ranks. And all through the ranks, it kind of looked like the state of Texas. So I gave them an A grade. Our department got an F grade, the lowest grade possible, because there was no resemblance between our department in the leadership ranks and the diversity of LA County. And then any effort to try to improve diversity was actually suppressed by the organization. They deliberately did. And what they did is they were using what we call window dressing. We'll promote one Black, one Latino, and yeah, we got one of those. And that was it. So the person who got that position knew that they had to keep their mouth shut, be thankful that they were the official window dresser, and the department was done with diversity. Wow. That's what my dissertation revealed, and with hard, fast evidence. Highway Patrol was playing a similar game, but they were focused on Black and on female, and everybody else didn't have a prayer. There was overrepresentation. So wait a minute, but what about all these other people? So I think with that measurement tool, this is pretty cool. I got to measure my own department today on the same statistics, and we scored so much better.
Now so it's not an F, it's no longer an F?
And now we're at parity across the board. In the entry ranks, deputy, we reflect the diversity of the department. The only area where a little challenge is on Asian American, because their vocation, their parents, doctor, lawyer, engineer, they can't get out of that. Some are starting to now. We're getting a little bit more traction, which is good. But in the African American community, I believe we're around 8%. County population is right about 8%.
And I know you said you wanted that to be higher, right? In our conversation.
Yeah, the goal for hiring, I wanted to bring our hiring goal to be about 15%, so we can keep it at least at to the 10%. Remember, because even if I hire 15%, I have 698 sworn African Americans on the department. That's greater than the entire size of the Long Beach Police Department. And I want to make sure that number stays relevant there, because I need to have the representation in all the communities that we serve. And same thing with females. We're trying to get 33% hiring goal for females and get it over the 20% mark, which is going to put us in the lead in the nation. For sheriff's departments, again, our workforce, we know, is 50% female. We're not going to get to 50, but we can get somewhere reasonably close to it.
And is it true that most law enforcement follows the LA Sheriff's Department throughout the nation, or the things that you do kind of leads the way?
Our history, because we've been around for 172 years, and just by sheer size, and we've managed to screw up enough things that we figured out how to do things the right way, that we do establish some best practices. And if someone else has a best practice that's working, we'll grab that too. In the old days, it used to be not invented here, NIH. Right. If it wasn't invented here, it wasn't done. So like when LAPD came up with the DARE program, the sheriffs had the same program. It was the exact same thing. I mean, that's silly games. Right. Semantics. But now we're focusing on, if it works, let's do it. But fortunately, like for civil unrest, a big example of that, we were able to protect peaceful protesters during the George Floyd protests, and by the tens of thousands, and no one went to jail, no use of force. And that was a big difference versus the people that came to actually harm the city and work under the cover of the people that are legitimately protesting. So we were able to distinguish between the two successfully, and other people adopted some of those strategies. Our less lethal things that we deployed, no serious injuries at all. And I contrast that to 1992 when I was a young deputy. 58 people died. I don't know how many hundreds of people were severely injured, and the losses were in the billions. To this day, you go to South LA, and there's vacant lots that used to have a thriving Black-owned or Latino-owned business that never came back. Just a massive
I know. Like, there's a whole strip on, like, from Manchester to, like, I want to say maybe almost like 92nd and Western that never fully recuperated. And it was, like you said, it was like a row of Black businesses, a row of Latino business, and it hurt us really, really bad.
Vermont, same thing. You see these little checker, there's a business, there's a lot, there's a business. Like, wait, who was in the vacant lot? Yeah, there was a business there.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up that too, like the changes between 92 and now, because my first encounter with the LA sheriff, it ended in some casual brutality, and some of my property was destroyed. And I had a similar experience for my dad when I went home and talked to him, and my older uncles and my older cousins had the same experience, all LA sheriffs, because, we grew up around the neighborhood, 113th and Normandy. And, so I want to ask you, because of course, I'm not laying this at your feet because that was way before you were the sheriff, right? But I want to know, because we see that it's a generational thing, what are some steps you're taking as a sheriff to try to change that culture that's been prevalent for so long?
Well, I can tell you one of the things I did as soon as I took office, and I campaigned on this, was body-worn cameras. Let's get that impartial, eye to see what's going on. I had to fight the supervisors tooth and nail for it. I don't know why. You'd think that would be a no-brainer. Yeah, let's get it done. No, they were the biggest obstacle. They threw everything at me they could to delay the implementation of body-worn cameras, why would they do that?
Right.
And I think it was just political. They didn't want to give a young new guy walking into office a big win. But we got it up and running by October of 2020. And now today we've had a 31% reduction in citizen complaints, because now we have body-worn cameras. We get to hold our personnel accountable. We get to separate fact from fiction, because we get a lot of complaints that turned out, no, okay, let's roll the tape. And then the person on the line, oh, you have a tape?
Right.
End of complaint. So it helps us focus on the people that are actually doing wrong. Either their conduct is like marginal, could be better. Maybe their interpersonal skills, they lack tact. Yeah, okay, they were legally right, but there's a way to go about being legally right but not making an ass of yourself.
Right.
And that the cameras are giving us a wonderful opportunity to pick those apart. So it allows for the supervisor then to intercede with the deputy and say, hey, can you explain this? So it's been a positive tool. Deputies were kind of, leery of this at the beginning, but now they've come to embrace it because now it's their witness as well.
Right.
So I think it's been a plus for both sides of the equation. And that is one example of things. We've done many other things that some people don't realize, but on our use of force policy, we added a lot of things that were behind the George Floyd murder. There's a lot of talk about duty to intervene, duty to report, duty to cooperate. We had those more or less in our policy, but they weren't solid enough, specific enough. We wanted them to be very declaratory and obvious, so we changed the policies to reflect the movement. Remember the 8 Can't Wait movement?
Yep.
We had all 8 elements in there, but they weren't quite as strong as they could be.
Gotcha.
We strengthened them now, and they literally read that, and we're enforcing them, including whistleblower protection now. And so those things are all designed so internally people can say, if someone is doing something wrong, they have a means to go about and have it addressed, that they don't have to risk their career or anything like that. So these are all positive developments. And then there's a settlement called the Gates-Johnson settlement. This is probably the more complicated one, in that the department agreed with the unions representing the deputies that if there was a case that was both criminal and administrative, you had to resolve the criminal case first before you could proceed to the administrative.
Right.
But the problem was that resulted in some people being relieved of duty and paid for 5 years while they're waiting on the district attorney to get off their butt. And, okay, was it legal or not legal? For example, use of force. And there's cases that can't wait 5 years. You know, I think there's an expectancy on behalf of the public, and we agree. So on a case-by-case basis, based on the circumstance, for example, if it's an unarmed suspect who dies at our hands, those ones, now we can put the administrator run at the same time as a criminal.
And can you give me some examples of those cases that actually happened where you were able to utilize this policy?
Well, a big one was in the news a little while back was the death of Ryan Twyman.
Yeah, I was right around the corner from my house. I remember that very vividly.
One of the two ended up being terminated. The other received a suspended without pay, a long-term one. So that was an example of that. Another one happened just today to other individuals on unlawful use of force. And there's another case with the same two individuals that's being litigated right now criminally, but we completed that case, and those two were terminated today as well. So it's working, the policy, and there's a lot of things we can do, but one of our biggest hindrances is actually waiting on the district attorney to get an opinion. Because when it comes down to what they call a state of mind shooting, well, I thought he had a gun, I thought he was reaching, those ones, we have to really interview the person, but we can't interview until they're not facing criminal liability.
Right.
Those are the ones that drag out, and we're like, oh, I need that information. But I can't make a decision because then I fire first, taxpayer has to pay the price later.
Right.
And I don't want to screw you guys over as taxpayer.
Right. Okay. Well, I really appreciate, you going into, because sometimes I know it's hard to have these kind of conversations and be able to give the nuance in a press conference, to be able to give the nuance of all the policy. So I really wanted to give you a chance to sit down and give us some nuance to the conversation, because, even like how when you talked about, the unarmed shootings, when you say, there are times where it's egregious, and then there are times where there are other circumstances. And I think the community needs to start hearing more of that. I think that could be one of the things that could help rebuild the trust between law enforcement and the community.
Well, my goal as sheriff is I just don't want anybody to die. Even the bad guys, as some people say, they got whatever's coming. No, we want everybody to live, and if they're doing something bad, we want the criminal justice system to hold them accountable, but alive, not dead. In fact, now, for example, when we have barricaded suspects, our success rate of barricaded suspect is uncanny now. Every single one that I've been reading, I get the updates on my phone. Suspects surrender peacefully. Literally, time again. The tough ones are the patrol deputies because they don't know what's happening. They have to stick their neck into an unknown and make a split-second decision that someone else might spend a year deciding if it was the right or wrong decision.
Right.
But the guys on the SWAT team, they have the advantage in, they're bad guy there, they're armed, they don't want to come out, so it's a little easier. I mean, their job is extremely difficult, but it just shows our reverence for human life. We had a case last year, it lasted so long, the barricade, that they had to replace, and a new shift, all the crisis negotiation team, the SWAT deputies, everybody had to be replaced for a new shift because that's how long the whole thing took. We're waiting it out in favor of saving the person's life, even if it's someone that people say, screw him, he should. No, we're still going to save their life, and that is our goal.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to give you a chance. Give me your elevator pitch to African-American boys. What is your elevator pitch to African-American boys? I think Luna will be better as sheriff than Villanueva. What do you say? What do you say to us?
Well, I'll tell you, you don't have to worry about the red family tree or the banana peel on the radio car. With me, you're going to get a partner, someone who views you as an equal, as a peer, who wants to see you succeed, and we're going to devote all of our energy to, one, I want to hire you, for starters, and I want you to view the department as your shareholder and stakeholder in the department as every other member of the community is, and we're here to serve you, keep you safe in everything you do, and let's form a good partnership.
Okay, that's a pretty good pitch. Now let's get into a little bit of honesty on your part, a little honesty and reflection. What are some things you feel like in your term now that you probably could have done better, that you plan on doing better moving forward with?
Well, hindsight is 2020,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm dealing with corruption within the Board of Supervisors. I don't think all of them are corrupt, but there's only 5 of them. There's enough corruption going on that really damages the whole operation of county government. So, had I known now what I knew then what I know now, for example, on rehiring a Carl Mandoyan, that was a rightful rehire. But there's no game plan on how to bring back someone who was wrongfully terminated based on misconduct from investigators. There's no game plan. You don't open a book, I go to page 3, chapter B. No, it doesn't exist. So we created it. And it was the right decision, but just the wrong time.
Okay, so even about that, right? So because that's one of the talking points that people say, like, well, he wanted to rehire somebody who was accused of domestic violence against the board supervisor. So what do you say to that when they feel like you're hiring somebody that has hurt someone who's unprotected?
Well, exactly that. One is they didn't read our rebuttal to the Inspector General's report. It's about 600 pages long. We went into deep dive on the entire situation. We determined that, 1, it was a false accusation. There was never any case presented criminally. So you can't fire someone based on an allegation. You actually have to prove it. The department never proved it. They admitted that they did not prove it. But what they did is they concealed an exculpatory witness. And they interviewed the exculpatory witness, and they did not give it to the defense. Imagine if this were a death penalty case. Every single person who opposed the rehiring would have been outraged that an exculpatory witness was concealed from the defense. They'd also be outraged if doctored video evidence was admitted into trial, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
People would be justice for fill in the blank. So why did it change? It's still the same due process, 14th Amendment. Why did it change? Because it's a cop now, not someone facing the death penalty.
So what you're saying is probably, for the most part, a lot of us didn't have a lot of the information.
Yes, and it's very easy to manipulate for the politician. It was so easy. Oh my God, he's hiring a domestic abuse. This is nothing like that. What we're doing is, if it's a wrongful termination, we changed it. We told the board, we gave them all of our findings. And here's the scary part. They doubled down and hired a law firm to sue me in my first month in office. They didn't even tell me, oh, by the way, we're going to sue you. So I'm giving them, hey, this is the whole case. And they said, thank you. And I walked out of the room and I get served 3 days later with a lawsuit. And that really woke me up to, wow, these people know how to play dirty.
So we know that you got smoke for the board, and we know they got smoke for you. So let's talk about it. Because, again, I want to talk about all the things that when I tell people, hey, I want you to, come to this community meeting and meet with the sheriff. Oh, I don't want to meet with him. He's going after his political opponents. Like, all those talking points that you hear. And it's funny because you hear the exact same points. Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, everybody kind of got it from somewhere, and now it's like it's bubbling. So let's separate fact and fiction, right? Like tell me exactly what's going on between you and the board. Look, it's clear. We know y'all got smoke for each other. We're not going to pretend that ain't what it is. But tell us about the process of people thinking that you're going, or are you going after your political opponents? If that's the case, let me know what it is.
We strictly go after complaints of crime. That's what we do. If you were filed a complaint with us today, hey, supervisor, so-and-so did this. Okay, we'll take it. Okay, we'll write it up. And this person says it this. Okay, let's start seeing, is it true or not? That's our obligation as investigators. In fact, the state constitution, Government Code Section 25303, says the Board of Supervisors shall not obstruct the investigative function of the sheriff. Important, very big words.
Yeah.
Shall not. Doesn't say except when it's politically inconvenient, then we want to pretend that they can't do their job because of conflict. No. We do our job, and when we're done, we present it to either the DA, the Attorney General, or even the feds. And we consult with all 3 entities, right, on a regular basis. Hey, we have this case. What do you think?
So this is not something that you unilaterally did. Like, this is not something you just like, oh, she started the hiring freeze, let's get her. That's not what happened.
No.
Because that's what it looks like in the streets.
No.
You know what I'm saying?
See, what people are unaware of is that the board launched an investigation of me when I was a candidate for sheriff. Literally, I just gone past the primary in June of 2018. The inspector general started illegally downloading my personnel file. He had no authorization to do that. The previous sheriff did not authorize him.
So why they have beef with you so early on?
Because they knew there was something that I had that they could never change. I'm an honest sheriff, and I will do the right thing no matter what. In fact, when I was a sergeant, a young sergeant, I was confronted with the corruption of Lee Baca and Paul Tanaka, and I called them out publicly. I put it in writing. I gave it to all the division chiefs and commanders. This is wrong. It's going to lead to the downfall of the organization. Pay attention to this. They laughed at me. They killed my career, obviously. And then fast forward, 8-10 years, they're indicted and going to prison. Why? Because they ignored what I said. Today, we're making the very same statement. There's corruption on the Board of Supervisors. I took the necessary action when someone made a complaint of crime. We investigated it. And not only did we investigate it, as a result of the investigation, now we had the astonishing admission from Supervisor Kuehl that the Inspector General and County Council were illegally alerting them about a search warrant.
Yeah,
if you did that, you know what happened to you. If I did that, you know what happened to me.
Yeah.
But somehow they thought they were exempt from following the rule of law. So we presented that to the Attorney General and said, hey, now we're victims of, this is a funny part, our public corruption unit became victim of public corruption. So now that we're victims, we can't do the investigation anymore. So we asked the Attorney General, okay, please, now it's in your hands. Please do your job. And he did.
Okay, so, man, this is so funny that you like telling me like this. So the way you just said it is not the way that it came out to us in the public.
Remember, the Board of Supervisors has enormous sway on how the LA Times reports.
Well, I mean, we know that because she was throwing people under the bus from LA Times when she came out with cuffs. So we know what
no,
it is.
she didn't even come out in cuffs.
Oh, yeah, she was just standing walking.
She put the hands behind her back like she was cuffed.
She didn't have cuffs?
No. In fact, from what I understand, she was even say, hey, don't go outside barefoot, put your shoes on. And she marched outside barefoot because she wanted to make the scene. Oh, for me, look what the mean sheriffs are doing. You guys fell for it.
Yeah, they got us.
Hey man, so it's crazy, like the way that it came out to the public, right? Like the way the information was funneled to us, it felt like, or it was made to feel like, oh, he went after his political opponent, and now the AG is taking over to take it from him because he's dirty, right?
Here's another example. Inspector General. My predecessor, McDonald, initiated an investigation on the Inspector General illegally downloading my files. But somehow, mysteriously, the investigation stopped before I took office. We uncovered the same information, but now there's like 23 victims. I'm not the only one. And wow, it's thousands of files. And they went to town the weekend before I was sworn in. They were in the office in the middle of the night with external hard drives, downloading everything they could before I showed up and get sworn in that Monday. So when we found out about this, I think sometime December, January, we got the whole story, what happened. We met with the Attorney General representatives and the FBI explaining what they are. And so we looped them in from the very beginning. And the FBI said, well, we don't have a federal crime here, but we'll give you technical support if you need it, because of all the IT stuff. And the AG said, very famously, because I was there, he said, well, you know what? There's nothing that prevents you from investigating. Okay, so, because we do criminal investigations on our own people all the time. And of the 5 named suspects on this, 3 of them were from our department. So, all right, we'll initiate the inquiry, the investigation, and it wasn't until towards the end of that year that Max Huntsman decides that I'm retaliating against him because of his report on the Carl Mendoza thing.
Right.
So, well, we initiated that stuff way before you even thought of writing his BS, report on that. So people, if you know the score and you follow the game, you realize everything we've been doing is what we're supposed to do, and everything they've been doing is a very calculated act of retaliation, and they feed it to the media for their, oh my God, look what the mean sheriff is doing now. Classic example, Sachi Hamai, the former CEO of the county. The board gave her $1.5 million and 24-hour security because the attorney said she's deserving of combat pay, what she had to endure because of the mean sheriff. What? Didn't file a report, didn't file a complaint. There's a policy for every county employee that they have to do. Did not file a lawsuit. So what were the mean things I said to her? You never knew. But what did the Times run the story with? That I harassed the CEO. You know what she did? Or what she didn't do? This is when the pandemic was first unfolding and people had to be do a quarantine. You know, remember the 10-day quarantine?
Absolutely.
So the question was, well, if they're being exposed on work, how do we pay for the quarantine, or what we were going to capture that? They didn't have a clue. So we asked them, hey, I'm not going to force these people to be paying out of pocket for something that they're getting at work, because they were being forced to go into places. There was no vaccination.
Right.
And they said, well, we don't know. So we had a chain of emails, we don't know. And then there was a big Zoom meeting. And I told her, hey, that's not good enough. We need to know. People are concerned about how they're going to pay for this. And then I think towards the end of the day, then they switched the narrative. Oh, you should have known all along. You know, it's just an admin day. Don't you know any better? But of course, their own records say they had no idea what to do. And from that, all of a sudden, I was harassing her. Don't know how. But what does the Times carry? Screaming headline: CEO leaves, $1.5 million, settlement. So following the Sachi and my story, then amounts to a theft of public funds, misappropriation of public funds. You can't do that. And for a county employee to sue to get $1.5 million, they're going to go through the ringer, and they're going to spend years of their life doing that. And she just walked away within a few days with a check for $1.5 million. It was a payoff for her silence.
Yeah. So how did you become the boogeyman to the LA Times then? Like what?
Remember that Times ideologically wants to push the narrative that we can reimagine public safety, the entire criminal justice system, and get rid of the jails, that we run the nation's largest jail system, and let's shrink the sheriff's department down to next to nothing, and we'll build up social services, and everyone's going to be happy and sing kumbaya. But I'm an inconvenient person in the middle for that plan. And there's a lot of money at stake here, because we're like the last batch of funds from the county budget that hasn't been really rated yet. The probation department is in tatters, destroyed. They keep funneling money into this Measure J that was ruled unconstitutional. But where's the money going? Who's getting it? They're private nonprofits, 501c3s. The CEOs are making an average $800,000, the top 10. They make twice as much as I do. The money's going to a place that the LA Times ideologically likes.
Right.
And I mean,
and you were in the way of that.
I'm in the way of that whole operation. And then the board, they're breaking up all the county employee unions and the traditional county services, and they're handing it off to the nonprofit sector. So this is a sad thing, because I can give a black kid from Compton a career, a respectable career makes good money, good benefits. They can feed their family, they can even entertain to buy a house. But no, they're going to pay 5 kids at $20 an hour to hand out water bottles and croissants at the homeless. That's the trade-off. And I say, no, we need to have the kid making the top dollar with a career, which is what our department is offering, and they're destroying it.
So I want to go back to something you said earlier. You said how many black officers, deputies do you have?
We have 698 total.
So you have 698 total. How many black women have your opponent put in those positions?
Goose eggs, 0.
And ever.
I think, in fact, we got to do a shout out to new Sergeant Alexander that just got her stripes last week, I understand.
Yeah.
And considering that the police department has been around for 130 years, and Mr. Luna has been in the leadership ranks for the last 20, he brags about it. they could never find the time to recruit, mentor, train, promote a single African American woman. That's mind-boggling.
Well, okay. Well, then if we're gonna talk about his, let's talk about your record. Let's talk about what does your leadership look like in regards to African Americans? What is your leadership
Well, I
look
can
like?
tell you this right now. I have 4 division chiefs who are African American out of my 12. And you may be familiar with one, April Tardy, who is Central Patrol Division. That's the busiest division, which is the most demanding. She's been a chief now, I think, for over a year. And then we have Joe Williams, who's the one who runs Court Services Division. You're familiar with him? And one that gets the least amount of attention but deserves a great amount of praise is my budget director, which is Division Director Conrad Meredith. He is the one who's balanced our budget, put him in the black from it being in the minus, in the red. He's done it 2 years in a row now. He worked the CEO's budget office before. So he's with the Sheriff's Department. He's been on for 35 years in county service. He is an expert. And my predecessor shoved him aside and brought in a lady from San Diego that left us with a $101 million deficit. So what does the LA Times say? That, I don't know how to manage my budget. They put me in a budget spending plan, and the budget is a disaster because I fired my budget staff. They said, no, we got rid of the one person that we never should have hired in the first place.
Right.
And we went with a guy, and he's African American. God bless him.
And now now the budget is no longer in a deficit.
But what's most important is he knows where all the bodies are buried with the county's budget practices, and that is a threat to them because he can call them out when they're doing gains with the budget, and that freaks them out because they can't pull a fast one over anybody.
Okay. So you do have a better record than Luna.
It wouldn't take much to have a better record. Not at all. In fact, I believe I have 34 African American female sergeants. 34.
And he didn't have one.
He didn't have one.
Jeez.
And I think I have 91 African American male sergeants, 698 total for sworn, and then up the rank.
Okay. So I know a lot of deputies work in jails before going on patrol. Now, this is something that I have a big problem with. What are your thoughts on changing that policy? Because I feel like, say, for example, how you get the guys who aren't from the neighborhood, didn't come from the neighborhood, their first 2-3 years, their first interaction with African Americans are seeing African Americans and Latinos as criminals and as threats. And then they go out to work with regular citizens. So there already can be biases just literally from, I've been working in jail, so all the people that I encounter are, people in the criminal justice system, and now I got to try to deal with regular folks at home and try to change that mindset. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a mixed bag. There's not an easy answer because I tell you one thing, deputies who work the jail system first and then go work to the streets, taking the bias issue aside, when you go at the maturity level and understanding what they're seeing and understanding criminal behavior and how people interact, gang members interact with each other, they have a more familiar eye with actually how to treat people. And now that's why I set the bias part aside.
Okay.
They're not, basically, green. They're not going to fast and pull them because they know how they're being conned by someone and the fast talkers and what to look for.
Right.
They also see people under influence of different narcotics coming into the system. So they have an easier understanding. Say it's someone green off the street, went through the academy, and boom, now you're working Compton Station Patrol. This is much of a culture shock in a different way than the one from jail. So there's a learning curve there. The danger is, too, is there an acculturation process that might lead to a bias.
Right.
That's always you have to safeguard. On the flip side, the way our system is now, you can actually get out of the academy and go straight to patrol if you go to a transit services bureau or you go to Lancaster and Palmdale. Because they're faraway places, unless you live up there, people don't want to make the drive.
Right.
So people that can bypass custody altogether go straight to patrol.
Okay.
And I eliminated the patrol requirement, and it's doing that. It's facilitating people who are around custody go to patrol quicker. And I'm also be able to retain people that work in a custody environment and they want to make a career out of it, because we need people to excel in that area of work.
Right.
Because we have an obligation to do both. We can't separate one from the other.
Okay, that makes sense. That's a perspective I hadn't thought of it that way. But again, like I said, like you said, there's always the risk of some of that bias of somebody who, especially somebody who doesn't have a lot of interaction with African Americans in their day-to-day
That
life.
can be very true, especially if you come up from a community where you don't see African Americans at all. All you see maybe just 100% Latino, 100% white. You don't get the interaction.
Right.
Other communities like Compton right now is, I think, what, 65% Latino?
Yeah.
It's actually majority Latino, but everyone in Compton grows up in school. African American Latinos are together.
Yep.
So they're pretty much wise to, how people interact, and it's a very smooth transition for that group.
Right.
Which is, we want to hire them.
Right.
That's our
Back
that's
to
our target right
back
there.
to the target. Right. Okay. I know this is something that me and you have spoken about before, but what are some of the things that you have done to like help with morale or help with the current relations between Black and Latino deputies within the department?
Well, we've done quite a few things. This is something where elections have consequences. When an outsider came to McDonald, he was literally firing people just because he could to prove a point. And then his theory was, well, that they could earn their job back, through civil service commission. But yeah, you spend 4 or 5 years out of a job, you come back, when you win your job back, you're angry, bitter, you're older, and what good are you to the organization or to the community?
Right.
That was a huge disservice. I firmly believe in due process, and let facts, our decisions be made based on facts and evidence and proper investigations. And we make it an inclusive process. It's working that way, because so when I terminate someone, I'm about half the rate of McDonald. But again, today was number 157 and 158. Those people, we've had a 36% reduction in employee lawsuits against the department. And that is enormous. In fact, McDonald had 53 lawsuits. They were wrongful terminations. We're down to 15. That's a big difference right there, because now people say, okay, my employer is fair. And other people will say, man, if you got relieved of duty with this administration,
You must have been doing something.
doing something really bad.
Right.
So there's not the backlash where before everybody thought, man, we're just a number in this game. We don't even exist as people.
Right.
And now people are existing as people. And we did something that had to be done that hadn't been done before. We flipped the entire pyramid of the organization upside down. Before I took over as sheriff, the department was run by the Good Old Boy Network, literally. And minorities, females, just window dressing. And they just made sure they kept it just close enough where, okay, you won't get the EOC on your tail. But what was valued was just interpersonal relationship. Not who do you know, but who knows you.
Right.
Are you in the car or not? But when I took over, I flipped the script. It's like, what is your record serving the community? And what is your education? And all of a sudden, it doesn't matter what color I am. It doesn't matter what gender. What is my track record serving the community? So all the people that never had a chance before, but they were sitting all these years of service to the community, all of a sudden, they moved up to the front of the line. And who were the ones howling and screaming? The ones that were in the car, riding a desk their entire careers, that never amounted to anything serving the community. They're the one that had to take a back seat, and they're the ones, some of them ran for sheriff, some of them have now endorsed my opponent, and they want to bring that good old boy crowd back. That's the danger. We're one generation away from getting rid of the entire Tanaka foot soldier syndrome. He's going to bring it back. If I'm fortunate enough to succeed, they're going to die. Writings on the wall, all those retirements, they become official. It's a whole new day for the department.
I like to hear that. So let me ask you, what are some campaign promises you feel like you were able to keep?
Well, we talked about the buy one camera. Another big one that was huge was getting ICE out of the jails. That was enormous because one, no one had ever done it before. I ended up getting death threats from the left and the right at the same time on the same issue. I got a hate mail from the Trump White House. And while the left is trying to call me, Trump Jr., the Trump of LA, I'm getting trash from the Trump White House at the same time. But what was important about getting ICE out of the jail is it made everybody safer. And they couldn't figure out, well, why? Well, because now the undocumented community in LA, that's 1 million out of the 10 million residents are undocumented. That's 1 out of every 10 people. And when you go with, well, they're not by themselves, you have mixed families. You may have an undocumented person, a documented, a resident alien, a citizen, all mixed together. If they're all afraid that you calling 911 is going to lead to a deportation, how safe do you think you are if no one's reporting crime happening?
Right.
And we made it very, very obvious. For example, the drop of 1% of reporting just a crime or rape means 350 more rapists are on the streets.
Jesus.
So what we did is we established a bright line of separation between federal immigration enforcement and local law enforcement. They both need to do their job. We need ICE to do their job, to secure the border, enforce immigration law, but they just cannot be mixed together with local law enforcement because it harms local law enforcement ability. And by creating that separation, now I have some of my conservative friends now acknowledge, okay, that was the right thing to do. Even Daryl Gates, remember him?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Not exactly the poster child of the progressive movement. He figured it out 40 years ago when he said, did not want to do cooperate with ICE. And
Right.
Can't remember what the issue was, but had to do the same thing, that they were not going to do interviews or anything with immigration. Because you mix the two together, it harms local law enforcement. So I think we arrived at the right position of that. The other one was our captain selection process. It used to be the good old boy system, or in Mexican politics, they call it dedazo. Oh yeah, you're it. That's how sophisticated it is in Mexican politics.
A tap on the shoulder.
You tap on the shoulder. That was our department. So what they do is they find the guy they want, the good old boy, and they put the two ugliest people next to the pretty boy. And then, of course, might be some community leaders or somebody. Oh yeah, we'll pick the pretty boy, like they had a choice. No, the whole thing was engineered from the start. Now, all of the lieutenants, all 360 of them, can apply to be a station captain. But now the criteria is you got to have 10 years of community service at the rank of sergeant, deputy, and lieutenant. You got to have 10 cumulative years, and you got to have a bachelor's degree or higher to be competitive. So from all 360. Oh, and you can be a captain too. Try it. So for each station captain that is open, we get about 40 on average, 40 applicants. From those 40, we take the top 10 that have the 10 years and the education. Those top 10 had to be interviewed by the undersheriff, and it's cutthroat to the core where everybody's stressed out. They're going Toastmasters, they're trying to do public, it's common, but it's good because it's forcing them to, one, you got to know the community you plan on representing as their de facto chief of police. You got to have relationships with them, and you got to speak articulately.
Right.
So that group takes the 10 and brings it down to the top 5. Now the top 5 are the best from everybody. They go before a community panel that might be a representative from a supervisorial district, if it's unincorporated communities, might be a community leader, a religious leader, it could be a city managers, council people, but there's a group, an ad hoc group that's gonna do the interviews.
Right.
And they pick the winner.
So now you're saying there's a real process now.
Oh, it's a real and it is tough. But the one who wins it, God bless them. They went through a lot, and they have a sense of accomplishment. But it's also important for the people who did not make it, because they see the one who made it. Oh, I got to go back to school. Oh, wait a minute. I got to spend more time in patrol in that community. Oh, I got to bolster my interview skills. All these things. So now they're making themselves more eligible. They're up in the game in their qualifications to be competitive, to ultimately land the job. So but now that we're today, we've done every single one of the patrol stations, all 24 of them have gone through this process now, which is pretty cool. And the results are with LaTanya Clark, Pilar Chavez, East LA, born and raised in Maywood, and she ended up becoming the captain of East LA Station, which serves the community of Maywood.
Right.
And that is how it works best. Dwayne Allen, South LA. I don't know if you know him. Same thing, and he became the captain of South LA Station. So it's working, and that's diversity at its finest, but it's based on equal opportunity, not based on, well, let's do the window dressing, let's have one of these and one of these. That's artificial.
Right.
And it upsets your workforce. You want to talk about camaraderie or morale on your workforce. Now I have lieutenants thinking, man, I got a shot at actually being a lieutenant legitimately without, humiliating myself.
Right.
Breaking out the old knee pads as they say. Don't have to do that anymore.
Right.
I can, on my own merit, compete and get the job. And that was modeled after the experience I went through. I could never interview for a job at all. I was blocked from everything. I was supposed to not go past the rank of lieutenant because that was not my lot in life to aspire to be anything higher.
Wow. Okay, so there's a process, and even within this process, we still have, like you said, more diversity coming into the sheriff's department. So I asked you about what campaign promises you were able to keep. What campaign promises weren't you able to keep, and what do you plan to do about it or hope you can do about it?
Well, I talked about during the campaign 4 years about raising the educational standard. We did raise the educational standard to minimum of a 2-year degree last year. But over the last month, we've realized now, because when the county imposed a hiring freeze, we had a huge pipeline of applicants coming through. So it was easy to raise the educational standard. We still had a bunch of applicants to pick from. But when they imposed a hiring freeze, the applicant pool, everybody kind of went their separate way because they're going to move on with their lives. We lost it. So when we raised the educational standard, now I don't have the applicant pool to meet it. So now we're doing an emergency bypass of that standard and require them to have this 2-year degree within the first 5 years of employment. And once we get out of the emergency and back to normal hiring, well, then we can reimpose it upon entry. So that's one example, and we're just adjusting to the reality on the ground.
Right.
We need deputies.
Okay, and what are some things you foresee being able to do going forward to, get more people involved with, because I know the community will talk to the police if they feel trust. They will talk to, because, everybody talk about, no snitching, but it's not like that for regular citizens. But what regular citizens are afraid of is talking to the police and not being able to be protected. I got a friend of mine back in high school who decided to, he witnessed the gang murder and he decided to testify. He testified, he wasn't protected. Everybody in the neighborhood knew what happened. He was killed. So because of something like that, and we were like 19 years old. So because of something like that, the rest of the neighborhood is going to be quiet, right? So what do you think can be done to try to bridge that gap, restore some of that trust to where, if I see, there goes sheriff. I just, I want to bother you, but is happening in my neighborhood. You think you could check, how can we make that bridge to where we have that line of communication?
Well, one thing we can do is, when I took over, we initiated the Community Advisory Council that McDowell had pretty much dismissed, and it was dismantled. My predecessor, Lee Baca, had initiated one. It was good initially, but it kind of started going by the wayside because people were using it as a tool for self-promotion. They weren't actually involved in the community. Our version of it, we retooled the entire thing with a good governance model, and the Advisory Council was very instrumental throughout the pandemic, doing food banks, for example, clothing banks, toy drives. We partnered with the Center for Family Health and Education to do vaccination, and we initiated them by zip code, because the county had everybody going to, remember Dodger Stadium to get their vaccine? Yeah, you had to be wired and be mobile to get your vaccination. But what about Auntie that lives in an apartment complex on Normandy and 106 who's not mobile, not wired? When does she get her vaccination?
Right.
Or Abuelita in East LA who has neither, and there's, 8 people living in the house that are going in and out because they're all essential workers. Where's their vaccination? So I went by the mortality rate on zip code. The 2 highest ones were in East LA, was 90022, 90063. So we partnered with the Center for Family Health and Education. We said we're going to do a drive-by zip code, a mobile vaccine clinic. Within 2 or 3 days, the governor announced 400 clinics by zip code throughout the state of California. Because now we're matching the need where the biggest mortality rate is. Instead of, because in Dodger Stadium, it was a line of Land Rovers and Teslas.
Right.
Cruising in there to get their vaccine. It's like, well, that's not the concern. It's the people that are forced to work, the essential workers. That's their starting point. But they never thought it through because, again, they live in a little bubble with their little Zoom thing.
Absolutely.
And they weren't thinking on behalf of the people out there in the community.
So I know you brought up the California Trump thing. So before we get out of here, I want to talk to you about that because you have the distinction of being one of the few sheriffs in a bipartisan environment that have been accused of being too progressive and then been accused of being Donald Trump Jr. in the same year. So what's your message to Democrats and Republicans in the LA County in this tug of war of between who you are? Tell us who you are.
Oh, I'm a law and order Democrat. I've been my entire life. I've never changed party affiliation to meet some niche or try to gain an advantage for election like my opponent. That's who I am. However, I appreciate and I respect diversity of thought, diversity of action, most important of all, and perspective. And I think we need to listen to Republican voices, Democratic voices, independent voices, and people that hate all parties, and start listening to people and their needs. And so when we do that, a classic example, we went to the Venice Boardwalk to help the drive to get the homeless cleaned up, the boardwalk to the community. Hugely successful venture. And turns out there was residents of Venice, there were Democrats or Republicans, there were neighbors that never knew. But what brought them all together was the homeless men defecating on their front lawn. That became their sole concern.
Right.
And all politics is local is a prime example of that. So that'll change your party affiliation in a heartbeat if your local government is not addressing it. So I had a lot of Democratic people, very liberal, progressive, speaking to very conservative people, and they all agreed on the same thing. Yeah, that's our problem, and we can help. County government, city government, their fundamental flaw, their fatal flaw, is that they only allow one ideology at the table, and that's a progressive ideology. No other ideology is permitted. They're shunned, censored, shown out the door, or they're never even allowed into the conversation. And with that, you've dismissed half the solutions that are available to fix things. You're dismissing the stakeholders that have a stake in what's going on. And if you're not eliciting their support, you're ramming solutions people don't care for down people's throat. Yeah, let's put a operation or project room key, like I think Atlantic and Union Pacific in East LA. They rammed one there, and now the whole place is falling apart, and it's Operation Room Key. But they never bother consulting with the local people there. Hey, what's going to be the impact of this there? And we need to talk. We need to have everyone has a seat at the table in all levels of government, and also good things come from that. And until we get to that point, we're going to keep butting our heads against the wall and wondering, why is the homeless continuing? Why are our kids, getting killed? Why are all these things happening? Because we're not listening to everybody.
Well, Sheriff, I thank you for this candid conversation. I really appreciate you coming to take the time. I hope you feel like you got to get some things off your chest. I hope you feel like, this was that kind of diversity of thoughts that, you talked about in regards to, because, there are some things that I was critical of, and I feel like you've addressed some of those things. And of course, we're not going to agree on everything. We're not going to agree on every answer, but I do appreciate the fact that you were willing to come and talk and have the conversation, and were willing to lay out your plans, your policy, and who you are for my people.
All right, well, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate that.